You can do that. Already live. So there. Have any problems? Thank you very much. No problem.
Great, hello, and welcome to the Seattle Times. I'm Lynn Jacobson, I'm the managing editor of the Times, and we're so excited to have you here, spending a day on your professional development as journalists. A few things just to get out of the way. There is water in the back. If you need a restroom, head and to the left. There will be food later, I think. So, yeah, Dawn says yes. The Wi-Fi password is right up here, and I think we're good to go. So, welcome again. I'm going to hand off to Dawn. Thanks for being here.
Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Good. And my name is Don Myers. I am a crime and courts reporter at the Yakima Herald Republic. I'm also the Region 10 coordinator for the Society of Professional Journalists. And I want to welcome you all to our conference. In fact, it's our first in-person conference since that minor little thing called COVID happened. So it's a pleasure to see everybody here. And first, I just have to make an announcement. First, I want to express thanks to the Seattle Times for offering us the venue and the support for the conference and SPJ and journalism in general. And second, we have a bit of a programming change. This is obviously not the Department of Natural Resources talking about wildland fire. They had an issue come up where they couldn't make it, so instead you're going to be hearing my presentation, which was supposed to close the conference, as the opening. And let us pray to the fates that this is the only major problem we've got going on so far. Yeah, the title of my presentation is Let's Be Careful Out There. Now, does anybody recognize that line? Of course, Peggy.
There's enough gray hair in the room for most people.
Yes. Mhm. Yeah, back in the 80s, I know that was ancient history for most people, there was a police procedural called Hill Street Blues, and it always started out with their morning roll call and their Sergeant Phil Esterhouse, giving them the daily briefing. And at the end, before they went out, he said, let's be careful out there. And that's actually good advice for journalists as well, especially, in this age where, things are, a bit different than they were back when I started out. We've seen, people get a bit more antagonistic and violent towards journalists. Plus, there's also, in covering some stories, there are some things you have to be careful about, especially like if you're going out to, say, wildland fire or police standoff or demonstration or something. And one of the things the Society of Professional Journalists has is on their website a guide for safety for it's primarily directed at television journalists, but I feel that there are points in there that are applicable to journalists of all media. And in case you're wondering, my other qualification also is that I was an emergency medical technician for 9 years, which means I'm probably one of the few journalists in Yakima who's actually used Jaws of Life in real life. And if anybody has any questions as I'm going on, please feel free to raise your hand. And probably, one of the first things you should do is always take care of yourself. In fact, in our EMT class, the very first lesson they taught us is that the first life you save is your own. And, that may sound like borderline psychopathy, but it's actually a practical reason for that, because if you're injured or worse, you're not doing anybody else any good. And the same also in journalism. Basically, there's probably no story worth your life. So, the thing is to think about, like, is this assignment going to be safe? Like, or your producer that, hey, I really don't feel comfortable with this assignment. I think, there's, potential issues here, and, discuss it and see what you can do to address it. And, and also if you have to, sometimes go out, make sure you don't go out by yourself if a situation warrants that. Years ago, we had, there was a murder in Yakima, and the father of the suspect, he wanted to talk with one of our reporters about the fact that he felt his son was innocent. And it sounded like a bit of a sketchy situation. So our editor told the reporter to take me along with her. And of course, being the shop steward for the International Brotherhood of Smartasses, I said, oh, so I'm the muscle? But, it was actually a good idea because, we didn't know what the situation was going to be, and it helped to have two people there. Granted, nothing came of it, but, it's a case, you're better safe than sorry. And another thing is also what they call situational awareness. Basically, knowing what's around you, what's going on and everything. Like, let me give a quick quiz here. How many exits are in this room? Where are they? Good. Gold star for you. Yeah. Well, that was something growing up around firefighters, I was always taught, always look for the exits in the room when you go in. Because most people's instincts is to try to go back the way they. And let's say you're going down, even a more mundane example would be like you're covering let's say a structure fire. You want to think about where it is, where they might block things off, and position your car so you're not going to A, get trapped inside if you need to go, and B, that you're not blocking other emergency apparatus coming in. Because that would be bad. I've always said I never want the fire chief to say, well, we could have saved the building, but Myers' car was in the way, we couldn't get the engines in. And, it's also good, like, if you're going to be covering, say, a protest, basically be familiar with the neighborhood and think about, like, okay, if we have to get out of here, what are some of the best ways to do that? I hope nobody thinks I'm trying to scare them. I'm just saying, these are some things you have to think about. Like, think about, like, the different, the location, and also be aware that, in case, things, let's say the police try to cattle, you want to be able to know, okay, what's the best way for me to get out? Which is, a fairly important thing. And also with situational awareness, you want to be, keep an eye on things, because, things may look okay at the moment, but could easily turn and, go south very quickly. Oh, did you have a question? Okay, you just looked like you. Yes,
I'm going to add one thing. If you are, this is from personal exposure, if you are early to a fire, when you go to leave, make sure that you are clear of hoses. I had a very large ticket one time. I backed over a fire hose.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thankfully I fought it. And people used to look at me like, how did you? It was, but just, situational awareness is really important.
My father and grandfather were fire chiefs.
Yeah.
If I did something like that, they would come back from the great beyond and just rip me a new one.
Well, I had just gotten there fast and didn't realize there was a fire hose behind me, and it's a bad thing.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. When I go to a fire scene, my modus operandi is to usually park about a half block or more back, and then just walk. Because that way I know I'm out of the way, and if they suddenly bring in more apparatus, my car is in a position where A, I'm not blocking anything, and B, if I have to go, I can get to it and get out and not be stuck there. Yes?
When you have a structure fire, legally, or how close can you get? How close should you get? Just not be in the way of emergency services, but also get good reporting.
Let's see, I usually stay sort of on the, the periphery around the trucks. I mean, I don't cross over to the, try to get up as close as I can. And, basically, I'll look at the scene and it's like, okay, I can just, stand over here. Now, if you're dealing with, let's say, like a train derailment, like in East Palestine, I believe it's pronounced, obviously you're going to try to stay back from that as far as possible. In fact, the joke is you use the rule of thumb. You hold your hand out, your thumb out, and if your thumb can't cover the entire scene, you're too close. That's, when you're dealing with hazardous materials. And usually, they'll have sort of like a, perimeter area established, and, I'll just walk, make an assessment, give, contact back my boss and say, okay, this is what we've got here. And, firefighters are usually fairly cool if, as long as you, show them, you don't try to get in their way. I had one time there was a fire and, going around getting pictures and one of the firefighters is like, hey, you want to climb on the back of the ladder truck and get a better view? I'm like, I'm not going to argue. Now with, if you have a situation, let's say with a police standoff, they will usually tell you where you can go. Although one time I heard it on the scanner, they were having a standoff, and I managed to get down there just to where the yellow tape was. And then we later heard that they were telling the media the stage about 2 blocks back where you couldn't see anything, but I was already down there, so. But, they also, when they set those yellow tapes up, they try to figure out, it's like, what's the safest distance you can be. Especially if, you're dealing with an armed suspect. And any questions as we're going along? I want to make sure I'm not missing anybody. And any questions from folks online?
Well, we have one, is anyone getting Sony ads? So I don't think that pertains to this discussion.
Tweak the camera. Probably slipped in the demo mode again.
No, it does say demo mode, yeah.
What do I need to hit on it?
Tap the
I got it.
screen, that'll.
I got it. Go ahead, then, we're fine.
You do know today is also the anniversary of Lincoln dying in the Titanic sinking, so.
Protest coverage.
Okay, good. Nice little segue. Protest coverage. That's one where, basically you've got to really, as they say, have your head on a swivel. You keep an eye on how things are going to see if, because things have been known to start out as peaceful protests and then suddenly go sideways very quickly. And so what you need to do is sort of figure out, where is the best place to see both sides, and also helps, if you can do a little homework in advance, maybe talk with the organizers, find out what they're going to be doing. And also, it's maybe if you have a relationship with the police department, they'll know that, okay, well, you're a reporter, you're not, part of the problem, but basically it's a situation where you need to have, awareness of what's going on, keep an eye on the tenor of the crowd, and usually try to work together. And in fact, sometimes with protests, because sometimes the protesters will come after reporters as well. And you might want to try to draw as little attention to yourself as possible. Like, for example, instead of bringing the big, TV camera, you might want to go with, something a little bit smaller, or even your cell phone, because nowadays, cell phones are getting pretty darn good at, recording things. And you should also have your credentials with you. But, a lot of us, for example, this is mine, it's on a lanyard. Anybody see the problem with this? Yeah. That's not one of the breakaways. So basically, if things went bad, somebody could use it to strangle me. So what I do is I just have my credentials on one of these little clips. So that way I can either clip it to my shirt or onto my belt buckle, my belt loop.
Would you recommend keeping it in your wallet or in your pocket if you don't have one of those? Would you prefer it to be out?
It's probably best, would probably be good to keep it out so
So,
I would say that you gotta read this. I mean, if they're going to be complete, if it's going to be like one of these, the media is the enemy of the people, you might want to maybe just keep it in your pocket. And also a thing I did, because I heard about one reporter who got picked up in New Jersey, and he said he was wearing his credentials, but they had flipped around, and all they saw was the blank back of it. So what I did was I took my credentials, scanned it, and then laminated a printed copy, then just put that in the back, so no matter which way it flips, it's always visible, which is very handy. Yes?
To tie into that, what other safety things would you recommend for events where there's a lot of antagonism towards media?
I would say, try not to, provoke it.
There's a few different things. There's a lot of little objects you can get that can use.
Would you like to borrow the microphone?
That way. I can do a big voice, but. So a few things you can do. Number one, there are a lot of different things you can buy that can will actually you can attach your cell phone to, so it be like it's a body cam, so that it'll be continually recording, so you can have your hands free. The credentials thing is not having your wallet, because when you pull it out, someone in hostage situation can grab your wallet. But just have something, just a small clip that you have in your belt, or just in your pocket you can pull out to display if you need to. The other thing is depending on your outlet, maybe don't use a camera that has, or microphones or anything that has the station or the outlet on it, because that one, some outlets were targeted because of certain affiliations, so people saw them and then were harassing them, and then made the reporter feel very unsafe, and they're recording the whole thing, so even though the cameraman was walking and they're going back to their car, they kept recording because she was still mic'd, so they at least have that. And that becomes a thing of just for your safety now, just more for evidence, which is not where you want to be, is in a position where you're going to be covered, now the police can go after these people. You really want to be more proactive. So ghosts in the military, we call it sterilized, so don't have your logos on there. Have other things you keep your hands free. So again, I 3D print these little things. They just put on like a little chain or something like that. I use a dog tag chain, it's a little breakaway. And I can wear my cell phone right here if I need to be able to film something, so that I can walk and talk and write, or have my hands free. And that way just kind of, and also like that's also for GoPros and that kind of stuff that I can do.
Yes.
Generally, do you ever want to go in the crowd, or do you want to stay outside the crowd?
That's a good question. The question is, you want to get in the middle of the crowd or not? And I think that depends on the situation and the crowd. And, a few questions you have to ask yourself is basically, are you going to find yourself surrounded? And also, basically, will people see you as a participant in their cause, or as the neutral observer that journalists strive to be? Questions you have to weigh. Because I know in Portland, the authorities were claiming that, some of the protesters were saying they were reporters so they wouldn't get arrested or anything, even though they weren't. I'm not saying that happened, I'm just saying that's what they said. And that's something, you have to weigh in with the situation.
I think also, Crime Log Sophia, an editor here at the Seattle Times, and also Senator Costa on our news team. And I think for the questions about protests and safety, make sure you're in touch with your editors. Make sure you have their number either memorized or written on your arm in Sharpie. In the event that you get arrested, you want to make sure that your work knows where you are and that you're safe. Make sure you let your editors know when you're going to the protest, check in a couple hours in, let them know where you are. When you're leaving, make sure you let them know where you are, and when you're home, make sure you let them know where you are. As editors, we want to make sure our teams are safe, and it is also on us to make sure that our reporters are physically and mentally okay. So be sure to check in with your editors as the day goes on, and use your best judgment.
Yeah, good advice. Always, stay in communication with your editor or, somebody who knows where you're going to be. And, because I know like when I go out and cover things, I'm usually communicating back with my boss through Teams. And I discovered a quick way to get my boss to actually call me. I was at a standoff, and I just sent her a message saying, well, I can scratch getting tear gassed off my bucket list. And she called in about 30 seconds. And she's like, you didn't think I wouldn't call if you told me that? Oh, by the way, helpful hint. The surgical masks everybody was cursing during the pandemic, they're actually somewhat helpful with tear gas. Because the police warned us it would be deployed.
You might encounter pepper spray, don't wear contacts.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
Am I
just
getting
switch to glasses.
Make it
Yeah, no, I had
permanently
that,
dangerous.
yeah, it was awful.
no, my optometrist told me, contacts are not for you after he struggled to get eye drops into my eyes. It's like, yeah, you should just stick with glasses. Which I've got no problem with. Yes.
So, when you're out reporting, you get into a situation that aren't like that, how do you continue doing your job if you do?
Okay, well, in the case with the tear gas, I had already read about what you do in that situation. So basically, rule number one, don't slam your eyes shut. That just makes it worse. So I just kept my eyes open and just turned so it would just, the breeze would just blow it away. And I was fine in probably about 2 or 3 minutes. And how many people here have taken a first aid class? Good. That's also a helpful thing to know in an emergency. And also in situations like this, you might want to put aside professional rivalries and just sort of look out for everybody, your fellow journalists out there. It's like, yeah, you may not like their outlet or everything, and you're tired of them scooping you all the time, but you know what? In an emergency, it's like we're all in it together. So we try to look out for each other.
Would you say that goggles help with tear gas, or are they actually a hindrance? If you're wearing goggles,
Goggles would help. I didn't have goggles. So probably another thing to throw into the kit along with my binoculars and everything else. Yes.
You ever dealt with threats against you because of your reporting?
I've had a few people, like one guy said he wanted to, basically come up and beat me up because he didn't like what I was writing about the county attorney at the time. But back in the old days, you would kind of dismiss, talk like that. You'd say, it's just, some blowhard. But as we've seen with current events, it's like, we have to take these things a bit more seriously. And I would say if somebody gave you a threatening statement like that, contact your boss, your editor, and discuss like, well, what do we need to do to respond to this? It probably would not be a bad idea to develop like a newsroom safety plan to address how to, handle such things.
I'll add to that. So I work in the TV world, and so I get a lot of strange messages. I'm always mindful about what information of mine is out on the internet. So there are like public databases that scrape information that help us as journalists find people. But every 6 months, I Google my name, I Google my immediate family members' names, and I contact these websites to get my information out there, information down. So have you heard of True People Search? Go to truepeoplesearch.com, type in your name. You're gonna find your phone number, your addresses, stuff that comes from public records. Our information is out there. So every 6 months, Google and contact and take it down.
Thank you. Yes.
There are also services that do that, like Delete Me. I know some newsrooms use that. It's not cheap for each person. It's like I think like 125 a year or something like that. But they'll do it all across the internet.
Mhm.
And they often offer discounts for journalists. Depends on the service.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something to keep an eye out on. And also, privacy settings on your social media. And, pretty much, keep it as, locked down as you need it to. Like I try to keep a lot of things vague on there, like, I don't mention, like, my wedding anniversary date, because that's something an identity thief could use. I also, so that's something you also have to think about. And, and also the thinking, about like, how much information do you want people to know about you? Like, if you're a lifestyle reporter, okay, that's, one thing, but then you have somebody like me who, as one of my colleagues put it, he says, it seems like every criminal and cop in town knows you. So I tend to be a bit more circumspect. Like if you read my bio on the Herald Republic website, I mean, it just reads more like, a resume than anything because, I'm basically trying to, kind of protect myself since I get to deal with people who sometimes aren't very happy with what I write.
Just to add that, even if you are a lifestyle reporter or basically, report out anything that's not, cops reports, get your information off the internet. If people are creepy and crazy, no matter what you write about, they'll always have something against you. Take it from me.
I didn't, and I hope nobody thought I was disparaging lifestyle reporters.
No, I just wanted to
Yeah.
reiterate that. That's all.
Okay, but, it's good, to be safe out there. And any other questions? Oh, and since the wildland, the DNR, one little bit of advice on covering a wildland fire. Don't expect to go out to the front lines if you don't have the right gear. They are very particular about that. And it's not because they're being jerks who don't want you to see what's going on. It's because wildland fires are probably the most dangerous things that they encounter. I mean, these guys are professionals who train for it, and there have been many examples of them getting killed because, the fire did something unpredictable and cut off their escape routes.
Yeah, the last I checked, you didn't just need gear. It depends on the agency you're dealing with, but you also need training.
Oh, yes.
So, I never did it, but it was a significant investment of time. I can't remember if it was
You get a red card.
8 hours or 40 hours. It was, Yeah, you also just don't need to be out there to become a firefighter.
Right. But sometimes they do offer you a tour up to the fire line, but you have to have, the Nomex clothing and most importantly, the shoes, the proper footwear. Yes.
If you're covering fires a lot, do you know where you buy Nomex clothes?
Yeah, safety stores have them.
Same
And,
place that you should buy anything that's reflective if you're gonna be on a road.
oh, yeah.
I was one time closed out of something because I didn't have a hard hat, and so I carried hard hats, and yeah, you just have to have any gear that somebody says that you don't have. And you wanna ask for Nomex, and just ask, you can write to DNR and ask them.
Yeah, they'll tell you what you need and everything.
They're ugly and hot.
And like I carry a pair of boots in my car. They're Red Wings, and they are specifically designed for wildland fires, basically. Because like these shoes would melt, which is not good. But the wildland fire rated boots are designed to be more heat resistant, and they're a bit more sturdy, so better for climbing around. But basically, because we've gone many times, like, up to like the staging area, and they were going to give us like, a ride into the fire line. And of course, somebody comes up and, they don't have the right gear, so it's like, okay, nobody gets to go. It sometimes gets a little frustrating, but do you have to be on the fire line necessarily to cover a wildland fire? Not necessarily, but sometimes it helps, go out and see, actually what's going on. I worked in Utah. The paper actually supplied us with the gear, including the shelter. And does everybody know what I meant when I said a shelter? Okay, for those who maybe didn't, it's basically this pop-up device. When it's deployed, it's about a bit bigger than a sleeping bag. And it's designed so that if there's a fire, you get under it, and the fire and everything can burn over you, and theoretically you should be safe. But you have to know what you're doing with that, because you have to have it on a flat, non-flammable surface and hold that thing down as tight as you can. In fact, my boss was very relieved when I left and returned the gear that the shelter had not been opened.
One more thing we were talking about check your name, do a search on yourself every 6 months. I just heard this story the other day with our rise in AI. There's now a site called HaveIBeenEncoded.com. And it's the same as Have I Been Pawned, right? It's Have I Been Encoded, it's just like that, .com. And you can put your name in or forms of your name to make sure, unlike some of these where you could ask them to be taken down, this is just to know what's out there on what AI is producing on you. Mm-hmm. And it's usually wrong. So, just so that you know where stuff comes from, it's just HaveIBeenEncoded.com. And if you're public at all, you're probably out there in some way.
Is there any special advice that if you're covering in war zones, that kind of thing, for safety?
Okay, if you're covering an actual honest-to-goodness war zone, there's actually specific training various groups give for those going out there. Because basically, you're actually going into a literal war.
If you have questions, come ask me. I actually work with embedded journalists in Afghanistan.
Thank you. Because that's way beyond the scope of what I'm talking about here. But I know one thing we also did in Yakima, we actually had the county sheriff's office come in and do an active shooter training with us, which was helpful. Basically, the three things, either try to get away, barricade yourself somewhere, or in the extremity, be ready to fight.
Don, in your experience, from being, you said you were a paramedic and then also covering, cops, of course, for Yakima, you've seen a lot of things go down, basically. And I'm sure a lot of that has had some sort of cumulative effect, like it would on pretty much anyone. How have you, with the mental health effects on yourself, do you have any coping skills or techniques or anything that's kind of helped you get through those more difficult times?
Okay, let's see. I always like to joke that my psychological scars have psychological scars. But actually, I think for me, part of my coping thing is that, when I go home from work, I'm home from work. Try not to think about it, at least until a certain police captain calls and it's like, okay, who died? But, and also, so, don't be afraid to ask for professional help if you need it. So, like for me, as I said, it's just getting away from that, and also another technique is, basically debriefing with somebody. Talk with your editor or another colleague or somebody. And in fact, you all probably have my contact information, so if that's something you wanted to call me about, I'll listen. Do you?
Well, sort of in a situation where, there's sort of this events happening and there's professionals there, like the fire, or a protest where it's a lot of, really dangerous. How do you go about talking to people and getting medical and drug information or quotes?
Well, let's see. You're talking about like a situation with a protest.
Yes, let's be honest, protest.
Well, I try to look for somebody who appears to be like, a spokesperson for the group and talk to them. Oh, yes, because sometimes, if you know about it in advance, you can find out who a good person to talk to is, or if it's a group you've been covering before. Like in a couple of years back in the city of Sela, there was a brouhaha between Black Lives Matter and the city, specifically the city administrator who had not very kind things to say about them. I'm putting that as euphemistically as I can. But it's like I knew the group, the people who were the organizers, so it was fairly easy to talk with them when they're doing a demonstration demanding that the city administrator be fired. And of course, I already had contact information with the city administrator who would always tell me that he wasn't going to talk to me until I came around to his way of thinking. And so far, he still hasn't talked to me. But, it's just, basically a matter of, working its sources and, okay, there are situations also when you get sort of dropped into the middle of things, and then it's just a matter of asking, it's like, okay, who can I talk to? And most people say, yeah, well, so-and-so's talking to the press for us, so.
I just want to
please
say,
do.
if you're being dropped into the middle of something, whether it's a protest or some other event, it's okay to ask other reporters if they know who to talk to.
Yeah.
I think initially I felt shy about that because we're rivals and that kind of thing, but I got on one of my first days covering cybersecurity, told to contact Edward Snowden, the NSA, and Tim Cook. And I was like, okay, so I talked to other reporters from other publications because I didn't know what to do.
That's good advice, too.
Just want to make sure everyone's aware of a resource, the Committee to Protect Journalists. I haven't looked at their stuff lately, but they also have, I think, even online webinar type stuff. If you want.
Yes.
That's a little outdated.
Also DART.
Yes.
Yeah, DART has great advice on like dealing with trauma, especially, not just for those out in the field, but those back in the newsroom. Looking, like photo editors or editors having experiencing the trauma vicariously.
Being a crime reporter, even covering events such as like a mass shooting, talking to people, how do you
Well, you approach the questions, very carefully. Like I know when I speak with homicide, the families of somebody who's been killed, I'll usually ask, well, tell me about that person. What are they like? I will deliberately use the present tense because that helps not, further remind them they're gone. And I'll admit that is probably a hard part of the job, but I have been surprised by the fact that very few people have slammed the door in my face. Because a lot of people that want to tell you about, their loved one and everything. And like, and other, with witnesses, you just come up and say, can you tell me what you saw? And if, they're not feeling comfortable, it's like, okay. A lot of times I'll just give people my card and say, if you want to talk about it, give me a call. I put the ball in their court and they're in control.
I just want to add, I'm Lulu, I'm a journalist at the Seattle Times. It's a great question, and I feel like one thing you can do is when you're talking to someone that's experienced a particular type of trauma, is go to experts who understand it. I've done some stories on domestic violence, and before I approached anyone who survived that, I went to these nonprofits and asked them about, just the sensitivity. How do you approach some nonprofit folks who were really helpful with that. Same thing for a project I just worked on with my colleagues who present a little bit later today on special education, and I've never had those specific types of interactions with the families and children with really sensitive language to use. So we went to a lot of nonprofits, advocates, and experts and asked them, how can we frame this conversation to make sure people feel comfortable? What's the best language to use? And then obviously just ask your source, the person you're talking to, what would make you most comfortable. I've never had anyone snub me and say, usually I get thank you for asking, this is how I'd like to discuss.
Okay, looks like we're just about out of time. And any last questions before we wrap up? Well, I want to thank you for coming, and hopefully you gain some insights. And as I said, the SPJ website, Pointer, DART, all have great resources on this subject. Thank you very much.
Should
Yeah.